All right, everybody, welcome back to the Identity Jedi Show. Nice new virtual studio. As you look around, we've had some changes around here. We're trying to upgrade some things, trying to do a little bit better. This is our first foray into Riverside, so shout out to Riverside, like their platform. We're going to be using this here, but we have, as always, a very special guest on this podcast. I met him through a colleague of mine, not even a colleague, a friend of mine, Richard Bird, who became my friend, and then he introduced me to Mr. Larry Whiteside, our guest today. And then we quickly became friends, and then found out Samir already knows him. So you're about to get one of the best podcasts. This is about to be three friends who are about to nerd out about life, identity, everything. So Larry, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for taking your time.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I love having conversations with friends. Right, this makes it just a chat.
Absolutely. And Samir, let's check in with you, man. How's life treating you? How's summer going so far?
Summer is hot, and hotter in Austin, Texas. Larry's been here quite a bit. I know, David, you came 7-8 months ago.
Yeah.
But I don't know what it is. It's just every summer seems to get hotter, and I don't want to say it's global warming because that might get me in trouble with some people. But it's hot. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Well, I live in Tampa, and so I'm feeling what you're feeling. Like it's hot here and muggy and humid as all get out. Walking outside, you feel like you're walking in soup. So I get it.
Man. Well, I'm not quite in the middle, but I keep forgetting you're in Tampa, Larry. So I mean, I gotta shoot down there, man, because I'm in Atlanta, so it's kind of in the middle, right? Like, but hot Atlanta's coming around the corner. We feel hot Atlanta coming, right? Like it's been slowly creeping up, and so, but it's definitely different. I remember everybody used to, I grew up in California, Southern California desert, so it was always like a dry heat, but we didn't get like super, super hot. But, then I went to school in North Carolina, so I got used to humidity, stuff like that. There is a difference in Texas with that dry heat. I will have to say I'll take a dry heat over just
humidity.
When we get this humid, like just you walk out, like you just feel it's overbearing when it's humid and hot. Like it's almost suffocating.
Yes, and so here's the deal. And so I just came off of getting married in Colorado Springs and then going up into the mountains and hiking for a week.
Okay.
And when it's dry, man, the sun is hot. Like at least I sweat and it helps to cool my body down. In that dry heat, you don't sweat, so there's nothing cooling your body down. And so you just feel like your skin is baking. Like you literally feel like if you put some butter on, like you just might want to get a little fork, because man, you feel like the heat of the sun just feels different. So it's that balance, right? Because here, my wife and I go walking in the morning, and it'll be 78 degrees at 7:00 in the morning here, right? But that mugginess makes the sun not feel as hot, but it makes the heat feel more intense, which is weird.
Right.
But not feeling that sun on my skin, I would prefer that all day.
I was going to say that Austin's kind of in the middle, right? Dallas is the dry heat. It's up north, closer to Oklahoma, the plains. And then south near the Gulf Coast is Houston, which is a lot more like Atlanta. So Austin's kind of in the middle. So we get some days where you feel just that baking heat. Some days where you feel like I can't breathe, but it's hot, right? So yeah, we're stuck in the middle. I don't know if it's good or bad, but all the Californians who've moved here, welcome to Austin. We've had a lot of them. So.
Yeah, that you do. One of them bought my house when I left Austin, so that's how it goes. So here's kind of what I want to do. There's a couple of topics that I kind of want to throw around and just have a chat about while we're here. But in general, I do want to do like a little small like state of identity conversation, right? Because Larry, I want to get your thoughts on this, right? I'm always fascinated and eager to hear from like CISOs and people that sit in the seat or have sat in the seat, because it is a position that I will never take. There is not enough zeros in the world to get me to take that position. So I respect everybody that does it, because it just always seems like it's just a no-win situation for CISO. So like your experience, what you've seen over the last couple of years with identity, what's your take on where the market is right now?
So the interesting thing about identity is that I feel it's transition. And what I mean by that is A decade ago, I knew dozens of CISOs who were trying to kick identity out. Like if they went in and had a CISO role that was going to have them own identity, they were like, nope, I want no parts of that. And they were trying to kick identity out. Right. And it baffled me because, right, I think identity is at the core of what we do. Right. Know what you have and know who has access to it. Right. Like, I mean, it's really just some basic principles. So identity is at the core of that. Now I'm seeing that differently. I am now seeing tons of CISOs who are taking on, asking for, and trying to own identity because they realize when you look at the breaches over the last 5 years or so, identity has played a role, right? Privilege escalation and all these different things. And now when you've got this whole new lens on non-human identity, which is, why we're carving out non-human identity into a specific space, I'm not sure, because for me, identity is identity is identity, whether it's human, non-human, whatever. But the carve out and the call out for identity now is very, very large. And so everybody is talking about it. Everybody recognizes the importance of it. And CISOs are really making it a pillar staple. And I know guys who are looking and people who are looking for, like, I need an identity champion. I need somebody who knows identity to come in and sort of build this thing, help me sort of right the ship that I've inherited around identity. So it's a thing. It's absolutely a thing.
Interesting.
Larry, do you see, with that, sorry, David, didn't mean to interrupt you,
go
but
ahead.
Larry, do you see CISO saying, like, I want parts of identity, I don't want the whole thing because the whole thing means help desk type stuff? Or do you see them kind of saying, well, more and more CISOs are taking on IT type activities and tasks, and some of them are becoming CIOs, to be honest, right? What are you seeing more of?
Yeah, so I'm actually seeing more CISOs take on all of identity, right? And more CISOs are actually now taking on all of infrastructure, where the CIO is moving into almost a business enablement role, right? Where they are the thought leader in what is the technological things that need to be built in order to enable the business's business strategy. They help come up with that strategy and what it is, and then the CISO must go execute on building that architecture, right? And so the CISO owns all IT infrastructure from the wall to the switch to the cloud, right? And the CISO then runs all of that. And I tell people, I say this all the time, and people sit back and they're like, wait, because they hadn't thought about this. So where did the knock go? Right? I've been around for a long time,
Yeah,
right?
I
There
was
was
going to
this
say,
knock. There was a knock, the
was a
Network
knock.
Operations Center, right?
Yeah.
Well, as CISOs, we wanted more. We kept fighting. We were under a CIO. We had this knock, right? The knock did all the infrastructure stuff. They were right, and then firewalls and then detection systems. All these things were implemented, and we wanted to own things. So now we've had this transition that's starting to happen far more broadly, where now CISOs are owning all of the IT infrastructure stuff, right? That used to be under a CIO. And so now we've got control, but we still don't have the money. We still don't have everything. So identity has become a core piece of that. So I know some CISOs who don't own all infrastructure. They don't own help desk, right? But they own identity. They own all the infrastructure stuff. They own all key management. They own all of these things that fall under the identity landscape that used to be way off on the side and outside of our purview, so to speak. So it's an interesting landscape, but that's happening way more than a lot of people realize.
Got it. That makes sense. I like it.
So, because in my head, right, all CISOs, like, all you guys have like your secret, like WhatsApp channels, right, or your signal groups where you guys all talk, right, and you guys have like a little bat signal that you send across. So I know all of you talk.
100%.
What's been the take on like this chief identity officer role, right? Like you said that you've been hearing some CISOs say, like, I need an identity champion, right? Has there been discussion in any of the CISOs that you know about like this chief identity officer role? Is that something they were like, hey, like we're for that, or we're against that, or hey, like, yes, we'd have that, and they report to me, like, or just whatever, any kind of discussions that you guys have had?
Yeah, so it's interesting you bring this up. I literally had this conversation with five CISOs in a Slack channel. And I'm in more Slack groups than I can even count at this point, right? And I had never heard of the term before, right? I'd never heard of the term. And his boss, the CIO, was creating a chief identity officer. It's in a health system that would report to the CIO and be a peer to the CISO. And the CISO was like, "What the hell? Like, what? Why? Like, why are we going to have a person called out for identity?" He's like, I can own identity. I can do it. I can have like make them, a VP of identity and put them under me because, identity is this very large, ubiquitous thing, and identity doesn't just tie to a person, as I said earlier, right? You've got all of these other things. You've got keys. You've got SSH keys. And I just had a conversation around identity as it relates to authentication and key management with a Fortune 5 literally 2 days ago. And the head of global operations there, head of global security operations there was like, dude, we are so segmented. Like, it is absolutely insane. And we are getting audited, and all of these things are coming to light. And it is a mess because 5 or 6 or 7 different teams own a piece of
Right.
identity. And they're like, I'm willing to give up the piece that my team owns and send the team that does it with it, right? But me doing that, then it looks like I don't have enough to do. So maybe then I don't have the level of rank that I have in the company anymore, and they reduce me down because I don't have a certain head. Like, it is a very,
Wow.
very big conversation that's going on. But this chief identity officer was very new, and nobody when this guy brought it up, and he brought it to our attention, was like, can we talk about this? Has anybody else heard of this? And the other four of us were like, no, this is the first we've heard of that title. And he was mad about it because this person is coming into just on identity and going to be a peer, similar salary. So, but he as a CISO still has all the risks because the SEC is not coming after the chief identity officer. Like, let's be very clear, right? um, so it was the first I heard of it. I don't know how broad it is. That's the only conversation I've ever had about it. But I think we're starting to. We were the first ones where the notion was made that the chief title is being thrown around a little too much. But now the chief title, chief data officer, right, like now chief identity officer, like we got to slow this down. We gotta slow this chiefdom down.
Yeah, it's been a conversation in the identity space for probably like I first started having a conversation about 6 years ago. And the last two Identiverses, they've had, kind of sessions, panels on it. And at the end of the day, what it comes down to is that starting to realize that like identity has to get from buried down in IT somewhere and has to be elevated because it reaches and touches so much. It needs a higher level kind of conversation and leader to kind of to manage that, right? And whether it just means, and whether the end of that means, hey, it's a bigger, higher priority on CISOs, or like, to what it sounds like discussion, like grab a VP of identity, have them report to CISO, or whatever it is, but it needs to be on that like top, 3 to 5 checklist of like, this is what the CISO is looking at every day. And identity's got to be up there because it touches so much with the business, with security, with operations, how they do, with IT, right?
Third party
And then,
risk, like every
yep, yep,
identity is a central component to everything, right? Like,
yeah.
and I don't know how we got away from this. I don't know how we got to the point. So I'll give an example, and I won't name any names, but I know a CISO
Name
who
them, name
who literally um, got a CISO role at a Fortune 25. And when they got into their role, right, literally, they asked me to come on and advise. And I was already a CISO somewhere, but I had helped them in a previous role. So they asked me to come on and help them sort of create org structure and do some things. And one of the first things that they were like, listen, like I own identity. That it's too hard and it's super technical. Like, I don't want that. I'm like, why? They said, because I don't want to own the responsibility and they thought about the first thing that their mind went to when they thought about identity was password resets. The first thing that came out of their mouth as it related to identity is, I don't want to own the password reset process. And I said, well, if you think about identity just as it relates to password resets, then we've got a bigger problem.
Yeah.
And we sat down and we mapped out the entire ecosystem of identity and what all of it is. Password resets is one piece of it, right? But that's a subcomponent to all of the different types of identity streams that exist across an organization. I said, so owning all of this, and you're just focusing on this bottom piece across this ecosystem. I said, you need to think about this at a higher level and understand that each of these pieces is critical to everything you do. Every control you put in place, everything that you do, each of these types of identity, each of these types of authentication that it's going to happen, and someone or something is going to have access to someone or something else. That's what's important. The process down here at the bottom of how those things get reset, it is painful. There's going to be different ones based on different things. You're going to have different policies based on different things. But getting these things right and having them and having these structures in place is literally the thing that will make you succeed or fail. Period.
And I can tell you exactly how we got here, right? Because if we back up 20, 25 years ago, right? Identity starts to become like this thing, like companies start to exist. Like, we want to go solve this problem, right? But at that point, CISOs weren't really a thing, right? They didn't have, they didn't have the sway and budget and things that they had now. So you had to go in, identity had to go in, and it was this huge, big thing that we knew what identity was. And the business and the CIOs were like, what are you talking? I don't know, right? So what do we do? So the first thing is, well, we got to break everything down. So we broke identity down. We grabbed the little parts that we could sell to and talk to and build a story around. Why? Because in identity, like, we suck at storytelling. We were horrible back then. We aren't very good now. And so we said, what's the biggest thing we can latch onto that makes sense to the business? Then SOX and Sarbanes-Oxley comes out, audit compliance. Oh, okay, cool. This makes sense. The business wants to go spend money here. This is what I'm going to go after. And so you have that happening. CISO start to gain a little more power. We're talking about all this stuff, but we started solving an IT administration problem because that's the only thing that we could articulate that showed business value, that we could get the business to go write a check. Meanwhile, right, identity shifted and broke apart. And so everybody went best of breed, and we split off into all these different things. So then we started telling separate stories, right? Privilege access management is different than governance, right? Access management is this. And so everybody's all telling these different stories and all doing what? Telling the 18 different stories to the same person. So you two can both sit to this, right? You sat in that chair, right? I can only imagine when you guys are sitting there and these vendors are pitching, you're having these meetings, and you have one vendor and they're coming to talk to you about this, right? I'm going to come talk to you about PAM. Great. Then this other vendor goes, I'm going to talk to you about access management. Okay. I'm going to come talk to you about IGA. Okay. I'm going to come talk to you about customer identity and access management. And I guarantee you they were all saying the same words. And you guys probably sit there and be like, you said this, you said role and entitlement, you said role and you said who has access to what, you said who has access to what, and you're all 5 different companies. And right. So by doing that, the industry taught the customer and the CISOs, like, this is how you think about it, right? And we never connected it all and said, like, it's all this one thing that you have to manage. We didn't say that. We said, no, we're going to do here. So then we focused on IT password reset. Why? Because that's the easiest thing that we could solve. That's a pain point. We can show revenue. Hey, if we automate this password reset for you, exactly, right? Now we want to pay for all those sins and go, okay, but we're never going to converge everything. Now it's one big platform, and now we want to go start having these conversations. And so it's like, okay, cool, but for the last 2 decades, you've told me it's 9 different things. Well, and now that CISOs are elevated, it's like, oh, but it's all one thing, and now we want to tell you, like, how we can do all of this, and it's kind of like, yeah. So we've got a ton of confusion.
The cloud exacerbated this, right? Literally, yes. Right? Being able to spin up and spin down in the blink of an eye, right? Turn on, turn off, spin up, spin down, right? That really exacerbated the problem where people are like, holy shit, wait, right? I was just focusing on MFA. I was focusing on password resets. I was focusing on PAM in my internal infrastructure. I was focusing on these narrow slivers of what identity is. And now I've got this environment where all of those things are a problem, right? All of those things are a problem and a thing that I don't physically control because we leaned a lot on physical security, right? And so, well, it's in my
Yeah.
data center and right. But it was like, wait, so the cloud basically threw a whole monkey wrench in everybody's plans because now you have to think about all of those things simultaneously when you think about the cloud because of what can actually happen both from a risk standpoint, but from a cost standpoint, right? Literally, you've got all this data there. You can spin up or spin down all of these services there in an instance if you have the right access at the right time. And that can then cause a data breach. That can cause you to lose millions in revenue because somebody decided to freaking be mining Bitcoin or some shit up there. Like there's so many different things. Listen, the stories that I've heard that haven't come out publicly from people where they've got insiders doing things that they weren't aware of because they had access to things that they didn't know. Like I just had one CISO tell me somebody left the company. Now they left the company, but they still had, because they had created the SSH keys, they had access via the SSH from the server account to get back in. And they were in the operating systems in the cloud, right? They were in the servers in the cloud doing stuff and just taking little bits of data here and there. It's such small, and no one ever paid attention for a year. For a year. Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of circle the wagon on that, right? So one is, just going backwards from what you said, which is without physical security being kind of a key control, right? People started to emphasize the digital identity, right, as a way to get in. And even if you have two-factor authentication, it's still digital identities, right? At the end of the day. The second thing, going back to your CISO friend who was didn't want to take on identity because he thought of it as just password resets. Man, I totally see that because I think a lot of us were so busy with firefighting and detect and respond and talking to the board and not having enough resources to do the tactical work that in many cases, my understanding even back then of identity was very limited, right? And I needed a specialist to kind of come in and help. And I remember the situation for me, Larry, when I was at the previous jobs. My boss at the time said, "Why don't you take on the infrastructure? Because our VP of infrastructure was leaving, retiring. Why don't you take it on?" And I literally said to him, I said, "Man, I am 12-hour days just trying to keep my head out above water, losing talent to people who are paying more." And this was a time
Yep.
where the market was even more hotter than it is now. And I just said, no, I'm good, right? And a part of me was thinking like, so I'm the one who's going to find the gaps and then I'm going to have to fix it myself. Like, let me just be the one telling people shit is broken, right? Right? And I think identity, because, and to the point David made, I mean, I don't know about titles and everything, but we're all starting to see that identity has identity operations, identity administration, identity engineering, right? All like just like a CISO, right? Identity governance, right? Just like a CISO, we have these different functions, right? And I don't know what you think about this, Larry, but do you embed that in your regular GRC versus engineering versus security operations and say, oh yeah, ITDR is nothing but an extension of SecOps, right? The way I think of it. But or do you kind of say, okay, identity is its own fiefdom where you've got kind of a head off or chief off who is such a specialist that can run this and advise the other teams on what to do? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no. I think identity is a specialty, right? Because again, it's such a critical component to what we do, right? The governance of it, right? Yes, governance of identity, I think, can be part of your overall governance model in your cybersecurity program, right? Right? Because governance is data governance, and you've got people that sit on this governance committee that are going to bring their different lenses. So identity governance can be part of your overall governance program, where your head of identity participates in the governance meetings, and they are the one who brings that lens to the table. But
I
the
think
aspect,
the reason you bring that
right,
up is also because of privacy, right? I think
right,
privacy is also kind of, yeah, okay. I
right.
kind of figured.
Yeah, and so, but the operation of identity, it's its own lane, and it is so broad and so wide, like that you've got to have a leader. Now, similar to application security, right? I do think that there's opportunity in identity to have experts who are ultimately the ones giving the guidance and holding the people accountable to execute it properly in different smaller groups, right? So you don't have to have an identity team that physically and administratively owns it all, right, across the entire global organization. But what they can do is they're the ones who set the standards. They're the ones who drive the standards. They are the ones who then also govern the execution of said standards across the globe, where the teams may then own it locally themselves, right? So you may have the infrastructure team who has identity components that they do inside of their own infrastructure things that they manage and govern on a day-to-day basis. But this identity team sets the standards for them. It sets how they do it. It sets the guardrails for what they should do and tells them what to do, and then stays on top of ensuring they do it. They also are the ones who determine the technology sets that are going to meet the global enterprise needs, versus the infrastructure teams got their identity issues, and so they're looking at it in their very myopic view, right? The SOC teams got their identity issues. They're looking at it in their very narrow myopic view. No, you've got this identity team that doesn't have to be 30, 40 people, but it's a group of people that are looking at the enterprise and identity as a whole, and then they are working with the individual teams to implement the guardrails that they set the boundaries and the standards for in their individual areas. And then they are the experts that those people go to. Hey, we got a problem. This isn't working. Let's figure out a different process. Hey, is it the tooling that we have? Do we need to upskill some of the tooling? Like that piece. But right now, identity is owned at the individual group level, and that is a problem.
Makes sense.
Yeah. It's, I was having these conversations with customers, right? And I kept seeing the same pattern that they were very decentralized, right? And so it was last mile when it came to identity. And it was very much what I started seeing was, there's infrastructure, which they considered identity. It's like, we own Azure and Active Directory, so that's us. And I'm like, okay, great. But then the businesses own their applications and policies and how they provision entitlements and all this stuff or whatever. So I was like, okay. So, and I just kept seeing how decentralized all these companies were. And so identity was just out there, just kind of running. And what they considered was like, the only time it became like that it was centralized is like the onboarding process, offboarding process, infrastructure kind of did some stuff, service desk opened up some tickets, and then it just kind of went out to the rest of the business. And so therefore, as you can imagine, like things were super inefficient when they had to do access reviews, when they had to do this stuff, because now you're literally herding cats, right? You're trying to manage all these projects and everybody to get this information together, and you have no clue how they're handling all of it. And so I had a couple of, leaders kind of ask me, it's like, well, does this need to be, does this have to be like a complete centralized thing? Do we just roll all this up? And it was weird because I was like, theoretically, the answer is yes, but realistically, like, no, like I don't expect you to completely do your entire organization and bring all that back in. Like it's out of the bag at this point, right? You're never going to roll that back in.
100%.
But there does need to be this, and I would tell people, it's like it's a centralized, decentralized model. Like what you have to do is kind of start to create, and what I would architect people is like, you need to start doing like a center of excellence where at some point that's centralized is, hey, how we're going to manage the program, that's centralized. And you need to be talking to all the different business units. And then you push out, to your business units, like, here's what our policies are. Here's how we're going to do unique identifiers. Here's how we're going to do, access policies, things of this nature. That needs to be pushed out. And I was like, the biggest thing that needs to come from there is you make the decisions around the platforms, and then you
Right.
get everybody on the same page as long as that's concerned. And it's okay if like, hey, well, this division or this group, you give them their administrators, they go in and they manage to create their policies, that's fine, but you set the standard for, hey, this is the policy, right?
Right.
MFA shall be configured. Like these applications are considered sensitive. You must do MFA for this. Here is the, access policies. Where like that's what you set out. And then you say, now how you configure it. We gave you the tools. We gave you the platform. That's up to you to go administer and figure out. But we'll set that. I was like, that's what you kind of have to move to. And I think now that it just seems the realization that more and more companies have completely decentralized that. I think that's the only way that you can go about that, right? Because identity is a centralized type of thing because it connects to everything. So at some point you do have to quote unquote, which people, kind of go with centralized, slow down or come up with this process. And like, yeah, I'm not saying it has to be white tower and, you must wait until we bless everything. But I was like, no, there has to be some kind of central communication and planning around this, because otherwise, right, you are constantly going to have blind spots. Because if I don't know what business unit A is doing and they're making decisions about how people are authenticated and who's getting a given access, and that's completely different from division B, like that's where I find the gaps. And then again, to your point that you said earlier, it's the CISO that at the end of the day that's getting calls to the rails for it. Like, hey, why didn't you know about that? And it's like, Division B ran on their own.
Real quick break to tell you about the Futile Company. So look, this is a brand partnership. Listen, you've been seeing the hat lately on the podcast, and I know you're wondering, man, where can I get such a nice hat? This is where you can get it from, the Futile Company. If you like hats, if you like snapbacks, especially like I do, listen, you want to check out their stock, their inventory, the Futile Company. That's thefutilecompany.com. You guys know what it is. Check it out. Let's get you back to the pod.
Listen,
But it rolls
I
up
got
to
a
that.
I got a funny but true story exactly aligned to this. So we know that every tool today starts somewhere and then moves towards being a platform, right? Where, hey, we offer this today and then we move. So a company, literally, again, just recently talked with someone about this. Because they had identity siloed in different areas, one area was utilizing product A for part of what they were doing with identity. It stopped me. They grew. They got acquired by something else, and they then felt that part of it they weren't really doing as well for that. Identity section D over here in the part of the business is going out to the market. So they are in the process of identity section A is in the process of getting rid of this tool, getting it out. At the same time, Identity Section D is looking for a tool to do something. They go out and acquire what? This tool. So procurement comes back and is like, wait, we already have this, right? So as they're going to try and acquire it, procurement is then talking to Identity A and like, hey, why are you guys getting rid of this? I just got a thing. Somebody is asking for it. They're like, not us. And so they literally spent like 4 or 5 months in this back and forth because they couldn't figure out how this was happening and what the hell was going on. Because you had the individual procurements in this form of the business over here going and looking at the bigger books, this form of procurement over here, look, and they're trying to offboard, it was a mess. And like the CISO, she and I were literally cracking up about it at RSA, literally had this conversation. And it was like, but that's a real story of where the same tool is trying to be onboarded and offboarded at the same time in 2 different areas. And so she was looking at like, what the hell? Like, and she's getting ready to transition out. So she's like, it's no longer her problem, but but it was what you talking about this. It just made me laugh because it made me go back to that story. It's like, this is, it's what she inherited and she tried to change it. But, political capital, ownership, right? Oh, kingdoms and all of this stuff. Oh, no, you're not going to encroach on mine. Yeah, it's tough, man. It's very tough.
Listen, I'm going to throw this out there, and it's just this is pretty much an idea for like content that I want to try and create. Like, I really do want to have, and let's try and get this together. Like, a round table, and we could even, if we have to, either do it anonymously or like figure out a way to, make the, not create fake stories, but, protect the innocent or whatever. But
Yep.
what I would love to have is a round table of CISOs and talk about like actual operations, not the technical stuff. Like what you just said, like the political. How are you at establishing relationships? How are you at communicating like peer to peer? How are you at communicating upwards and downward? Because I feel like the hidden layers to all of this, we talk about all the sexy stuff and all the identity stuff, and we can wax poetic about that. But I feel like the quiet part is like, yeah, but here's the thing. If you suck at team building and you are a shitty communicator, you will fail at this job because you have to go play the game, because all these things, like you are responsible, CISO, for all these things, but guess what? You don't own all of them, but yet you do own all of them. So if you don't go and make nice and have these relations and understand the political understandings and all this stuff or whatever, like your job's done, right? I mean, that's outside looking in. So I would love to have like that conversation.
Listen, I know so many CISOs who would love to talk about it. Here's the thing. As a CISO, if you are not an influencer, you will fail, period. I don't care how much you do or don't know. If you're not able to influence, because at the end of the day, the majority of CISOs don't own anything other than the security controls that they have underneath them. That's it. So you own your operational responsibility in the organization is nil. So that being the case, you have to influence others to do the things you need them to do, right? Now, the number one person you have to influence is whoever the senior leader is that you report to as part of the executive team that is going to ensure that the CEO and the board back you. Like that's far and by the most important thing on the planet, because if you don't have that support, everybody is going to grab and hold on to what they own, because people measure themselves by how much they have. Just like we get into corporate environments and we revert back to children, right? How many presents did you get for Christmas? Well, I got this many presents for Christmas, right? So I obviously am more important than you because I got the right. It becomes that way. So you can't go into a corporate environment, get that buy-in from the C, whether it be the CIO or the CEO and the board, where they are your champion, so that when you go have that conversation with all of these business leaders that are peers to the CIO, that are generating hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in revenue in their business unit, right? And understanding how they get bonused, how they get incentivized, and helping them understand how you're going to make them make more money, so that they will start to hand you some of these things. That's the key. Is once you get them to understand that your job is to help them make more money, they'll then start to come off of it. But you have to be able to influence them and help them understand how you're going to do that, how it's not going to take away from what their kingdom is, how it's not going to take away from what their domain is, how it's going to enhance that. And because at the end of the day, all of them care about their check more than they care about anything else.
Well said.
Nobody does.
Right,
Listen, we all know nobody does this stuff for out the goodness of their heart anymore. That's not a thing, right? People are doing this because they want to get paid, right? We love what we do, right? But we also like the checks associated with it. I don't think any of us would do this for free, right? And so it's understanding that and understanding people's motivation and their drivers, and going in there and helping them understand how you're going to help them accelerate and meet that in a better way. And I tell this to people all the time, and they're like, "Oh, I never thought about that." I'm like, "Well, if somebody came to you and said, I'm going to help you make or double your salary, I'm going to ensure you get 100% of your bonus every year," you wouldn't. What you got to do? Like, it's really an easy mindset.
I think just historically we've paid a lot of attention to people who bring in revenue, like salespeople, marketing, go-to-market people. We've paid them well. We've paid them with bonuses. Most companies, a lot of the sales leaders will end up becoming CEOs or close, right? I think the world is starting to realize the value of employees that make sure you don't lose that money. Like the money doesn't leave the building because somebody stole your digital wallet or whatever. I think once you start getting people to understand that your incentives are tied to not just how much you bring in, but how much you prevent loss as well, right? I think then you have some of that.
Yes and no. So I'm gonna disagree with that a little bit. If
Sure.
you look at the industry, and if you look at, I'm not gonna say they don't appreciate us, but in the grand scheme of things, when you look at how every business is modeled and shaped, right? I'm gonna use, I won't name the companies, but I'm gonna use a couple of markets. So look at the VAR market, right? So when you look at the value added reseller market and name one, anyone, it doesn't matter which one, right? They are all multi-billion dollar companies. Now, if you look at how they are organized and structured from a leadership standpoint, there are very, very, very few real security leaders at the top of the food chain in
Yeah.
those organizations, either from an org chart standpoint or from a monetary standpoint. The money is being brought in by sales and led by sales, and they are the ones who, when as the organizations transition into new leadership, the people that are being brought in at the high numbers and put into we got a new CEO, they're always former people who have been in sales.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Even though there is opportunity where a person who was a security executive could go into one of those roles and do just as well, if not better, because they know the mindset and how to operate with the people that they are trying to get to, right? That the
Yeah.
sales and then having high level salespeople under them. But that's not what happens. And the same thing happens in private business. In private business, it's not the people who are risk averse. You're not seeing chief risk officers, right? You're not seeing chief security officers go into CEO roles. It's not who you're seeing chief operating officers, right? You're
Yeah.
seeing those types of people that understand how to operationalize a business and how to be operationally efficient and increase revenue while being efficient. That not protect revenue, because if you think about the mindset associated with protect means to close off and make less accessible in theory, right? From a revenue standpoint, that's not what you want to do. From a revenue standpoint, you want it to become efficient but open, because you want as much cash flow flowing as possible. And so there's a mindset around who a traditional security person might be in that mindset versus an operations person in that mindset. Because I've gone through looking at a lot of different companies over the last 5 to 7 years, and who's taking on these leadership roles in these, Fortune 2000 companies, and even looking at some of the best security leaders we've ever seen at all of these large companies. Very few, if any, are becoming CEOs of anything.
Yeah. It's true. Very true.
I know you're
You
shaking
guys are
your
gonna make
head,
me
David.
compliment sales guys again. I just I, this love hate relationship with salespeople, man. I'm but I
Listen,
mean, it's listen. As I've gotten closer, I get it. Like when you're managing at a high level, like just overall the sales process, right? It's and now I'm talking about the difference between a salesperson and a sales leader. I'm talking about a sales leader, meaning like you understand, you're tapped in with your marketing, you understand how to talk to the customer, you understand how your operations to get that efficient. You understand how to drive not only pipeline but close that pipeline and generate cash for your company. At the end of the day, that's why a company exists, is to make money. So I completely understand that part. And as I've grown, older and gotten closer to it, like I get the importance of it. But it does, to kind of Samir's point, there is there's pulling the money in, right? And there's making sure that it stays in. There's keeping the lights on. There's like driving all the other operations of the things that the leadership is going off and doing.
yep.
Because at the end of the day, you can say, look, we're going to go execute here. We're going to go generate this pipeline and go close down this. But if you don't, if the rest of the ship isn't set, like and you're leaking water from everywhere else, it doesn't matter, right? And granted, I think at that level, you would expect that, and the good ones do, that at that leadership level, you quickly learn you learn what your weaknesses are, you learn what your strengths are, and you learn how to put people in the right places to make sure that you can shore those up, right? The good ones figure that out. And
Right.
so you see the good salespeople that they're around, they see all the business, and they switch from a salesperson to a leader because they understand the difference,
Right.
right? Senior leadership at its heart is a passive activity. It's not an active one. Here's what I mean by that. It's not about what you do, right? So Larry, if you are now the CEO, it's not about what Larry can do every day in the 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours.
Nope.
It's what Larry can influence. It's what Larry can drive through the rest of everybody else, because you can't get everything done to run that business. And Samir being in that seat right now as a co-founder gets that more than anything else, right? Like, there is stuff that you can do, right? But you start to get leverage and you start to gain the momentum when it's like, okay, if I am multiplying my 8 hours by the X amount of people that I have, and I have them going at their best, now it's my 8 hours times there, or my 10 hours times there, right? Because I can't work 24 hours a day. You can try, but it doesn't matter, right? You're not going to, you want to go fast, go alone. You want to get somewhere, you want to go far, go together. That's where, and I've seen the good ones kind of, shift and pick that up. I've just met too many people, and but I get it.
Well, the sleazy salespeople you've met have probably been because they don't know how to foster and nurture relationships, right? And so the way they go about doing business is underhanded and not genuine, and not above board, as we would say, right? And so, but to your point about sales leaders, I will tell you that the 2 years I spent at Raycale was a journey and a half. And I say that because, I've sat on the outside. I've sat in the corporate environment, right? Understanding sales in the corporate environment at a big scale, but going into a startup and understanding sales at a micro level opened my eyes to a whole lot of the nuance that happens down there in the weeds, right? Of top of funnel to middle of funnel to bottom of the funnel to close, like all of these different things that a sales leader must do, where they must not just understand the pipeline, right, and how to get it from the top to the bottom, but must also understand the salespeople they have, must educate and motivate and equip them with what they need in order to drive through that pipeline, and then also hold them accountable and set standards and markers. Like, it's a lot. And it's very interesting to watch all the processes go. And then the sales operations piece to give visibility into quality of leads and what exercises and operations are happening that are generating leads that are working and that are generating leads that are not working. And so there's a lot to that, which is why I think there's been more salespeople that go into CEO roles, because at the end of the day, a CEO has to grow the business, right? They have to make the business more profitable than it was the day they took the role. And so in doing that, there's a lot of those nuances that, as a security person and a practitioner and even a security leader, you likely don't have a lens to throughout your career as a CISO. But once you get into, Samir's role, or get into a startup and you're doing certain things, you start to get a glimpse of this that adds even more value to your ability. Because, to your point, you're an influencer, you're a leader, but you also have to understand numbers. You've got to be able to lead and guide your CFO, even though they're the expert in numbers. When they come at you with things, you got to be able to call bullshit where it's bullshit, and hold them accountable to, well, why are those numbers looking like that? This is my understanding of these other things that are happening. And so it's tough. I don't envy, just like CISO, people don't envy the CISO role. I don't envy the CEO role because, a lot of times it rolls up to them. But what I'm starting to see is CEOs are starting to understand risk as it relates to data way more than they had in the past. They are starting to understand, because what's happened is the business has started to take on more data, right? Because now with AI and analytics and everything else, they're grabbing all of this information from all these disparate places to try and serve their customers better. And now they've been put on notice by GDPR and all these other regulations about the importance of protecting that data and ultimately what that means to the business and the bottom line and the fines and everything else. So I think CEOs finally started to get an understanding of security, but not from a technical standpoint, but from a risk standpoint
Yeah.
to the business and how that ties to their fiduciary responsibility of the business, because they want it to fiscally grow, but if they aren't taking proper care in how they protect the data and the systems that are governing their customers, what that's going to end up doing on the backside for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, man, this has been great. This has been awesome, bro. I'm serious. We're gonna get the CISO panel thing together. I want to do that. I think that's gonna be fun.
Yeah, let's make it happen.
Let's make it happen. All right. So with that, we're gonna wrap up. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you're listening on Spotify, if you're watching on YouTube, it goes a long way. We appreciate it. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to. All goes a long way. This is the Identity Jedi Show. So we're gonna be signing off. You guys know what it is. Be good to each other. Be kind to each other. Love each other. We will see you guys next time.